When it comes to poems, you're commonly seeing I and you and even they and things like that. But do they always necessarily mean those things? Sometimes they actually take on whole different characters and energies and things like that. So in today's episodes of Fine Print, we're going to be analyzing your use of pronouns to see what's going on in a poem of yours. This time the poem has been brought to us by the poet that can be found on Threads by the username at Holy Embrace. So we do want to thank them for allowing us to take a look at their poem. Guys, welcome to Fine Print. We're here every Sunday, right around 9 p.m. New York time, to analyze a poem of yours. And when I say analyze, I don't mean workshop. We're not here to edit and, give feedback, kind of share like thoughts on the poem. We're really here just to kind of analyze what's actually happening in the piece itself and trying to make sense of it all as we go through this journey into poetry. I'll be your host. My name is Jeff. It rhymes with breath. So make sure you get to breathe, relax as we enter into this piece. And I also encourage you, if you have some insights, if you have your own thoughts on things that are happening in the poem, be sure to let us know. Give me a moment. Let's take a look at what this piece looks like. All right, so we're going to dive right into this. The poem begins. No title. There's a long curve down your back, down your cheek, down the last tear that rolled down that cheek as you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us. Down the moon as she sits against the black sky like a neon light, bright peg. It makes us wonder what's really out there. Down the road of this season of life, but this curve doesn't allow you to see what's ahead like a blind spot. So you take everything a little slower and you're hopeful for what's to come, but you're hesitant to allow yourself to lean into that hope. There's a long curve that has to do with life and learning and finding yourself and finding your place. And people would like you to think they have it all together, but the truth is, no one does. All right, thank you to again at Holy Embrace for sharing the poem with us. This is a piece that I was particularly drawn to its use of pronouns, obviously for highlight of our topics. So let's just kind of highlight really quick where all these pronouns are occurring. So we have your, there's a you, there's a you. Let's just find all the yous first. Doesn't allow you, you, your, life, finding yourself, finding your place. People like to think, like you to think, but the truth is no one does. Okay, so those are all the yous I found. Let's now see other pronouns. So it seems like it's a you versus the speaker. But maybe even before we do that, let's see. We have an us. And it makes us. Seems like this doesn't allow you to see what's ahead. Let me see what's to come. Allow yourself. Oh, there's another yourself. Okay, so again, all I'm doing, and I think this is an exercise you can do in any kind of poem, just kind of track things. So your marginalia. Okay. No others. Another little thing. I don't think it's going to become a big factor for us, but we do have the she. We're imagining the moon is given the she quality. We actually just talked about Craft Talk by Mary Ruffle. She has a whole essay just on the moon, and how the moon is often linked to um, womanhood, feminine energy, and things like that. So I think it's interesting. Again, kind of referring back with the moon and she. Other interesting things going on pronoun wise that we want to highlight really quick. just gonna highlight like these little pronouns here because I don't think it's gonna be our focus, but you never know. So we had this people, it, we had no one, we have they. Okay. So one question I had as I was reading through this poem is I was asking myself, and I think this is a common question you see with you, is when you appears in a poem, what does you really even mean? Because is the you just other character, or is there more to it? Does the you change its meaning? So the way it starts off, there's a long curve down your back. It seems like we're talking about a single person. That's how it's striking me. And let me know if that's how it's striking you. It feels to me like we have a poem that's going to be you, other character, and I, speaker. Although this is interesting, a speaker that doesn't seem to want to get directly involved in the piece, not in terms of actually appearing. All right, so this you seems like a single person. Down your back, down your cheek, that rolled down that cheek. So everything's still you. What you thought was us. The one time our speaker becomes that gets mentioned. Okay. Um, so all of these yous to me feel like the same yous. What about the yous later on? Down the road of this season of life, but this curve doesn't allow you to see what's ahead. So you take everything a little slower and you're hopeful for what's to come, but you're hesitant to allow yourself to lean into that hope. So one of the things that I think is interesting between this stanza here and the first stanza is suddenly things are becoming much less specific in a lot of ways. I mean, we have this scenario with the road, but when we that road even changes immediately, right? It becomes the road of this season of life. So now it becomes this something that's a lot more generic. You know, that first stanza feels intimate in the sense of it feels like it's a you and an I together as an us. But next this stanza here, down the road of the season of life, now it feels very it could be anyone. It might still be the same you, but this could also apply to the reader. It could be talking about people in general and things like that. And the reason for that is because everything in this section is really ambiguous. There's none of that specificity. It's always a fun word to say. It's like, for instance, the first stanza, you know, that last year it rolled down that cheek as you sat there mourning the loss of that. That's a very specific thing. But down here, the road of season of life. But this curve doesn't allow you to see. You know, it almost feels like we're on like a kind of like a soapbox or something. Like just kind of like we're preaching to a group of people. It's very general. It's very general language that we're using in this part. So the you also begins to kind of take on that sort of general energy as well. Maybe it's the same you, but I'm not entirely convinced that it is. So what I would love to know what your thoughts are on this you. Do you think it's the same you? Do you think it's something that's more universal? Do you think that's intentional? Do you think it's unintentional? I'd love to know your own take on this. Because as the poem seems to go, it feels like it starts specific and then really kind of widens a lot. Um, because it even continues into that next stanza, the last one. There's a long curve that has to do with life and learning and finding yourself and finding your place. Now, again, this feels very. This is much more. I'm gonna call this like it feels like an impersonal you. Part of my handwriting. As we creep up, it feels very, very impersonal you. And then it's like this also feels impersonal, but in some ways it almost also feels like this long curve has to do with life and learning and finding yourself and finding your place. This feels like a speaker kind of talking about something that they've gone through themselves. So this last paragraph almost feels like a you that's become an I for a speaker that hasn't really appeared on their own in the entire piece. This last stanza reads a lot like an I. It reads a lot like a person reflecting and kind of saying like, you know, like Imagine I had like money issues and like I'm trying to talk to my child about that, and I say something like, if you spend all your money on bad things or you rack up a lot of credit card debt, maybe I'm speaking. It sounds like I'm almost like reflecting on my own experience or something like that. It's kind of has that sort of tone. Um, so I think it's really interesting how the you evolves in this poem from something that feels very singular to something that feels universal. And you can talk about, craft points and things like that related to that. But again, I'm not really here to discuss that. I'm just kind of here to discuss what I'm actually encountering. I'm encountering a you that its definition seems to be becoming much more fluid as I go through the piece. And I don't think it's just for the you that's happening for. I think it's happening as well for, let's look at the us. So my next question is, my first question, I should say, my first question is, that I would love your thoughts on, are all of these yous the same? Or do the definitions change of these yous? And I would love to know your thoughts on that. And I have a similar question, the next one. It's going to be this. Are all of the us's the same? Is the us in that first stanza the same as the us in the second stanza? And again, I think once I get to the second stanza again, once I get to that second stanza once more, everything feels general again. Like, yeah, we get this description of the moon, but this is a description of the moon that can apply to anyone. It doesn't necessarily have to apply to the speaker and to the you of the poem. It could apply to anyone kind of just like stargazing or looking up, on a clear night. And so because we're starting to lose some of that specificity here, it opens up the possibilities for us to not just be the speaker and the other person, but to also be everyone, and more something that's again once more communal. One, in addition to the kind of just these explorations of the pronouns there, I think one question we also kind of have to ask ourselves as we're reading through this is we have to ask ourselves, where is the I? Because the I is implied in many different places. And what does it mean? How should we interpret it? What does it mean if the I doesn't appear? So what does it actually mean in this poem if the I doesn't actually show up? Because it has an impact, right? So what does that signify in the poem if we're refusing to let the I actually make an appearance here? Because the I has a very large impact on the poem. I question how much can we even trust this I. This is an I. This is a speaker that's doing a lot of projections. Okay. And also, this is I that's almost kind of taking on a perspective of kind of like looking back and reflecting. Like, the time is kind of interesting, right? So we have theirs. So up here, we're in the present. So we're in the present tense here. There's a long curve down your back. So we got like this fact situation. Long curve down your back, down the last tier. So there's a curve down the back. There's a curve down the cheek. There's a curve on the tear as you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought. Okay, so the tear is still there, right? Just if I'm following the grammar of what's happening here in the syntax. The tear is still there in this moment. It's probably it might not be rolling anymore when I see down the last tear that rolled down that. So I imply that to mean that the tear is no longer rolling. It finished rolling, but it's still there, still present. Roll down the cheek. Okay, so the tear is still there, but I don't know if the U is still there. That rolled down that cheek as you sat there. Isn't that interesting? Shifting from down before it was down your cheek and now it's down that cheek. So this your cheek becoming that cheek. So again, there's so much shifting of possession and people and bodies in this poem. Um, Bodies that at first signify one thing but then mean something else. So we have almost like this objectification is not the right word. It's gonna carry wrong vibe, but this sense of like a body going from personal to impersonal, right down your cheek, that cheek. As you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us. We don't know if the you is still there in the moment. Um, is it the speaker just kind of reflecting on the morning and thinking about this person, like, oh yeah, this person has a long curve down their back, um, in their cheek, and this tear. It's like the first stanza is kind of interesting because I'm kind of placed, but I'm also kind of not. I don't really know where I am in time. Or I guess I know where I am in time, but I don't know where I am in space. I don't know where I'm located. I don't know if the speaker and the Yora are actually still in the same room. If the speaker's really just with that tear and just kind of also reflecting on the curve in the back and the cheek and things like that. I'm not entirely sure. As you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us. Interesting stylistic shift here, right? We go long curve down your back, down your cheek, down the last tear, that roll down your cheek. And then we get this real long sequence. As you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us. Okay. So this is where the eye starts making some really big appearances as you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us. So you have this emotional you, and then you have this speaker that's almost like objective, distant. This is so distant, in fact, that they're not appearing in the poem, right? As you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us. But then we also have a speaker who's projecting to a degree. We have to, from a reader's perspective, we're kind of forced to just assume that whatever the speaker says is true and right. We don't really know that. And when I see big stylistic shifts like this, going from like down, 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 and then this again long sequence, I just sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us. It feels a little bit forced. It feels a little bit heavy. You know, it's like the speaker really wants to make sure that this is the idea that comes across, which to me almost suggests that the speaker is projecting. It wants to make sure the reader has this impression, even though that impression may not actually be true. So I don't know. Is this a statement that we can trust, and to what degree can we trust it? Is this the reason why, as you sat there mourning the loss of what you thought was us, it seems like mourning the loss of what you thought was us is the tear? Like, so it seems like the sadness and the change of relationship state. Is mourning, the word that I'm most curious about is the mourning. Because I mean, it could be. If I imagine, it sounds like mourning the loss of what you thought was us. Sounds like a relationship has changed between two people, right? Mourning the loss of what you thought was us. Sounds like a relationship has changed between two people. Cool. And the one person, it sounds like they're crying. So the tear rolled down. So then the question is, are they crying because they're mourning the relationship? Are they crying because they're really frustrated? Are they crying because they're angry? Are they crying because they're scared? The speaker is interpreting it just as mourning and like upset about the relationship. Okay. Which could also be a kind of a self-preservation technique too, right? Because it could be that the speaker doesn't want to feel bad about the relationship changing. So it's like, oh, that person's upset because our relationship ended. When in really reality, because no, the person is like super mad at me. We're not given the full story, right? um, and then trying to explain other people's emotions, I think is interesting. Because we're only really given one side. Okay. Then move against the black sky like a neon light, bright peg. It makes us wonder. Again, this is a speaker that really wants to control how people feel. It makes us wonder. I can't say it makes me wonder. No, it makes us wonder. How could you not wonder? It makes all of us wonder. How do we know for sure that that is true for the us? And who, again, we mentioned earlier, who is the us? Is it the you and the speaker? Is it more general? Um, so there's a lot of like speaking for other characters going on, which I think it speaks to lends the poem a lot of irony. We're speaking for other characters, and yet not allowing the speaker themselves to appear. Like I think that sort of tension is really interesting. Um, but this curve doesn't allow you to see what's ahead. So once more, we get in the sense this is a speaker that is now telling us what we see and don't see. So it's assuming that if the speaker can't see it, then you can't see it either, right? But this curve doesn't allow you to see what's ahead. And then so you take everything a little slower and you're hopeful for what's to come, but you're hesitant to allow yourself to lean into hope. So again, we're building more and more assumptions. We're building more and more into the speaker's sense of knowing how other people would handle or think or believe it to be in the situation. And we're just kind of left to trust that that perspective is true. Finding yourself and finding your place. And again, we see a similar thing here. So the big question I have here again, so and it's hard because we don't have a title. A title would be really helpful to kind of understand what the big tension of the poem is. We start off with this sequence that's really emotional. This one person's upset, mourning the loss of what you thought was us. But then from there, we move on to wonder, right? In the moon. So it doesn't, the connection between the first stanza and second stanza is a little bit kind of tricky to navigate. We start off really sad and then we go to wondering about the moon. Like, hey, what's really out there, man? It's like, oh, wow. Um, and then we get to the third stanza, which is all about like caution and hope. And then we get to this last stanza, and people like you to think they have it all together, but the truth is, no one does. So the projection, the heaviest projection, perhaps, of the entire poem, the truth is, no one does. The speaker gives us a truth and holds it and assumes it works for every single person. So now the assumptions made just like continue expanding, expanding, and expanding as the speaker continues to disappear more and more throughout the piece. Anyways, what are some other thoughts that you have about the use of pronouns here? What do you make of the speaker not being present? What does that reveal to the speaker for you as you navigate the piece? I do want to give another quick shout out to at Holy Embrace again for allowing us to take the time to kind of dig through the poem, focusing on the perspective of pronouns and pronoun usage and agency and irony and things like that through the use of character, which I appreciate. We'll be back, guys, by the way, on Tuesday with another episode of Diversus Live. where we talk about all things poetry. If there's a topic that you would find to be particularly helpful, you can leave it in the comments. Otherwise, we will see you all later. Our next edition of Fine Print will be next Sunday, right around 9 p.m. New York. Once more, my name is Jeff. I will see you guys later. Hope you have a great start to your week. Have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good afternoon. Take care.